Hi, Pete. So,
Hi,
question
Karen.
for this week. Who are downsizers? You know, there's always talk about downsizing in real estate, online magazines and so on. Who are downsizers and what are they looking for?
Okay, so who are downsizers and what are they looking for? Thanks, Karen. Good question. So if you Google downsizing, it often relates to corporate downsizing where businesses need to save money and reduce staff and all of that sort of stuff. So we're not talking about that, but in a way it's similar because downsizing up to now, I think especially in the media, it's always related it to going from big to small. Because that's downsizing, right? And there's even been a movie about it recently where they shrink people down because that's downsizing. But that's not really downsizing. That's a very general, simplistic way of looking at downsizing. So I've been selling off the plan now since 1994. One of the projects that I've been selling is Zara here, which we're out the front of. And Zara is a really good example of a downsizing product. So there are people that want to downsize for different reasons. Some buyers downsize because, yes, their house is way too big and they want something smaller. And it's a maintenance thing. It's to do with, just the space that they're not using. So that's downsizing. For maybe a 65-year-old plus, and there's been some really cool changes in the federal government recently from the 1st of July, a couple, when they sell their home, if they're over 65, I understand that they can actually shift a fair bit of money, up to $600,000, $300,000 per person, into their superannuation as a lump sum one-off. Now, that's downsizing in terms of tying up their capital in one property and releasing some of that capital, putting it into superannuation, and then reducing the amount spent on the property itself. So that's a form of downsizing. So downsizing can also do with time. For instance, you might be used to going to work, spending half an hour in the car, or even an hour these days is not uncommon. And you want to downsize your time, so you don't want to be in your car wasting so much time. So you want to work and live close to one another. And often that means moving to an apartment or a townhouse or a small block home in the inner city. And that's another form of downsizing. So downsizing takes plenty of different shapes and also different age groups. So typically we used to think of downsizing for 65, 70-year-olds and so on at that stage of their life. Retirees, yeah, exactly. That's a typical way of seeing downsizing. But now, for instance, again in Zara, we've got downsizers in their mid-40s, we've got downsizers in their late 40s, early 50s, and they're downsizing for various reasons. At the younger scale, it's often to do with the fact that the kids are now going to university and they want to simplify their life in terms of instead of having this house to maintain and yard that's not being used anymore because the children have grown up and got to the point where they've got other interests in their life. So it's about changing the focus. But a big thing about downsizing, like I had a meeting with a developer this morning, and we talked about what are the key features, and we firstly needed to establish who the buyer is, who's going to buy into that project. And once we can establish the buyer, it's like what I said to him was, when an author writes a book, right? That book is always written, the author always writes with the reader in mind, but the best authors in the world tend to think of the one reader, and they have a picture in their head of who that reader is, how old they are, what do they like, what they don't like, all of those sort of things, sociographic, demographic sort of stuff, geographic descriptions of the person, and then they write to that person, so it's really appealing to them. So really good projects for downsizing, developers will have that in mind. They'll have that end user in mind. And as I said to the developer this morning, I said, well, look, if you're selling to a 65-year-old plus, their needs are going to be different to a 60-year-old, to a 55-year-old, to a 50-year-old. And again, it's also connected to their lifestyle that they're used to now. A couple of key things just to wrap this up would be bedroom sizes, ensuite sizes, what they're used to, what they want to retain, the rooms that they don't want to, they don't need anymore. Maybe the more formal rooms are no longer important to them because they're not using them. The size of the lounge room, the size of the kitchen. So many of our buyers who are downsizing, especially in that sort of $2 to $3 million price range, or up to $4 million, they're looking for a kitchen that's the same size as the kitchen that they have now. So they're not downsizing from that kitchen that they currently have. They're just removing a few aspects of the property that they have now that they no longer need, that's superfluous to them. So, I could talk about this for hours, and I often do with developers to get it really clear in their head who's downsizing, what they're prepared to pay, and what their needs are, and what they're looking for in terms of the product mix, and that the apartment, the townhouse, the small lot homes. So you always start with the end user in mind, and you work it out from there. So there's no one downsizer, there's multiple types of downsizers. They vary from location to location. But once you understand the principle of downsizing, then it's not too hard to come up with a product that matches the market. So a bit over, I talked a lot of different stuff there, but if you ever want to talk to me about downsizing, whether you're a buyer or a seller of a downsizing type home or apartment, then give me a call. Hope that answers your question,
Thanks,
Karen
Pete.
Hutton. See you.